All right, so welcome to another deep dive with us. I think today we're going to be tackling something that you already have some pretty strong opinions on,
Yeah.
and that's the Trump era.
It's a big one.
It is. It's a big one.
Yeah.
But, even if you think you've heard it all, I think you're going to be in for some surprises.
Yeah.
We're going beyond the headlines.
We are.
We're going to uncover some fascinating details, and yeah, there's always more to discover.
Always.
I think that's the fun part.
Absolutely. And what's really interesting about this deep dive is we're not just going to rehash history. We're using this script called The Trump Era, Policies, Legacy, and What Lies Ahead as like a launching pad
Oh, cool.
to see how his presidency is actually shaping our world today.
Yeah, that's right. And we're going deep.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to extract the insights that are most relevant to you.
Yeah.
Think about this for a second.
Okay.
How did a businessman with zero political experience
Right.
become the most powerful person in the world?
Yeah, it's the ultimate outsider story, right? Tapped into this wave of populism and rode it straight to the White House. It's fascinating.
And it all started with that slogan, the incredibly effective slogan,
Oh, yeah.
Make America Great Again.
Yeah.
4 words
Yeah.
that sparked a movement.
And, I mean, regardless of your political views, you have to acknowledge the sheer brilliance of that messaging, right?
Yeah.
It was simple,
Yeah.
it was powerful,
Yeah.
and it resonated with a lot of folks.
Yeah.
People who felt left behind.
By the
The
establishment.
establishment. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So we've established he had charisma, he had the marketing genius down pat.
Uh-huh.
But what about the actual policies?
Right.
Because as you know,
Yeah.
his time in office was marked by bold moves, but also some pretty serious controversies.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's start with domestic policy. I mean, the tax cuts he pushed through were a huge win for Republicans, right?
Right.
And they definitely had an impact.
On the economy. But, did they benefit everyone equally? I think that's a question worth exploring. You take the deficit, for example.
Yeah.
It ballooned under those tax cuts,
Okay.
which raises some concerns about long-term stability, right?
Yeah, and then there's the Supreme Court.
Right.
3 justices
Unheard of.
in a single term. Unheard of.
Yeah.
That is a legacy that will be felt for generations.
Absolutely. It's reshaping the judicial landscape. I mean, think about abortion rights. Think about environmental regulations. These are areas where the Supreme Court can make sweeping changes.
Big time. His America First agenda also really made waves.
Yeah.
But I think some people are still confused. What does that actually mean?
Well, I mean, it's essentially a policy platform, right, that focuses on prioritizing American interests
Okay.
above all else, especially when it comes to trade deals and foreign policy. Led to some major shakeups in the global arena.
Like with the tariffs.
Right.
Those caused a global uproar.
Yeah, the tariffs were a prime example of America First in action, right?
Right.
Designed to protect American industries, but it also triggered a trade war with China,
Oh, really?
created tensions with allies. And I think it begs the question, did this approach ultimately help or hurt the American economy in the long run?
That's a great question, and I'm sure our listener is thinking about that right now and has some opinions about that. But we can't talk about the Trump era without acknowledging some of the criticisms,
Yeah.
especially around climate change and healthcare, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you think about the Paris Climate Agreement, right?
Yeah.
That was a big one. I mean, aimed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions globally to
Right.
combat climate change. And, supporters argue that this was an essential step to protect the planet. Critics saw it as an economic burden on the U.S.
Yeah.
So regardless of which side you're on, the withdrawal really signaled a shift
In
in
America's
America's stance on these global issues.
global environmental issues. And then there were the investigations and the 2 impeachments,
Oh, yeah.
which definitely, added to the drama. Added to the drama, yeah,
Of his presidency.
definitely. But rather than dwelling on negativity,
Yeah.
let's shift our focus to the global stage.
Okay.
Okay. If there's one word to describe Trump's foreign policy, it's unpredictable.
Yeah, he kept the world guessing. But was that a good thing?
Right.
I mean, it kept America in the spotlight, but it also created a lot of uncertainty among our allies,
Yeah, exactly. Think about NATO, for example. He constantly criticized NATO allies for not contributing enough to defense spending,
Right.
which really strained relationships, raised questions about America's commitment, and then his decision to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal,
Yeah.
further shook things up.
Yeah. And we can't forget his approach to leaders like Kim Jong-un
Right.
of North Korea and Vladimir Putin of Russia. I mean, his direct diplomacy style
Yeah.
definitely broke from traditional norms.
It did.
Whether you saw it as bold or reckless, it definitely captured the world's attention.
It really did. And I think it raises a fascinating question about leadership.
In this digital age. In a world where information travels so fast
Right.
and public opinion can shift in an instant,
Yeah.
how does a leader navigate these complexities of global politics?
That's a great question. But before we dive deeper into that, let's take a moment to reflect on the impact of his America First approach on the world stage.
Okay. I mean, that America First lens really shaped his interactions
Yeah.
on the world stage. It's fascinating to see
Uh-huh.
how one core idea can have so many ripple effects.
It's like he was trying to rewrite the rules
Right.
of global engagement, just tossing out the old playbook and doing things his own way.
Yeah, and that's what made him so unpredictable.
Yeah.
You know, allies never knew where they stood.
Yeah.
Adversaries had to constantly adjust.
It's like he brought his reality TV persona
Yeah.
to international diplomacy. Lots of drama, unexpected twists, and always keeping everyone on the edge of their seats.
For sure.
Okay, but what about his lasting legacy? What remains
Right.
after all the headlines have faded?
Well, I think one of the biggest impacts of the Trump presidency is how it's changed how Americans view politics. He showed that a non-politician, someone who speaks their language and doesn't shy away from controversy,
Yeah.
could rise to the highest office in the land.
He really tapped into that sense of frustration
Oh, he did.
and disillusionment that many people were feeling,
Absolutely.
particularly those who felt ignored by the political establishment.
Exactly. And he did it through a masterful use of social media.
Yes.
Bypassing those traditional media outlets
Right.
and connecting directly with his base.
But you know, that direct connection came with its own risks,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, social media can be a breeding ground for misinformation and echo chambers.
It's a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a powerful tool, but it can be used to spread divisive rhetoric and undermine trust in institutions.
Yeah. And we saw both the benefits and the dangers of that during his presidency. I mean, he was able to mobilize his supporters, shape the narrative on his own terms, but it also contributed to the polarization and hyperpartisanship that we're still grappling with.
Yeah, it's like he ripped off the Band-Aid
He did.
on some of America's deepest divisions,
Yeah.
exposing the cracks that have been there all along.
And those cracks haven't gone away. In fact, they may have even widened.
So how do we move forward? How do we bridge these divides and rebuild trust in a system that seems so broken?
That is the million-dollar question, and I don't think there's an easy answer.
Yeah.
But one thing's clear, we need to have those honest conversations about the challenges we face.
Yeah.
We need to listen to each other even when we disagree, and we need to find ways to come together to work toward those common goals.
It sounds like we're talking about a complete overhaul of our political culture,
Yeah,
which is a pretty tall order.
it is.
But maybe that's what's needed.
Right.
Maybe the Trump era was a wake-up call.
Maybe so.
That we needed to realize that the old ways of doing things just aren't working anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, but it's also important to remember that the Trump presidency wasn't an isolated phenomenon.
Okay.
It was part of this larger global trend,
Yeah.
a surge in populism and nationalism that
Yeah.
we're seeing in many parts of the world.
It's like a wave that's been building for years.
It is.
Fueled by economic anxiety, social upheaval, and deep distrust of elites.
Yeah,
And Trump was just the most visible manifestation of that wave.
exactly. And it shows no signs of receding anytime soon.
Okay.
So the question for us
Yeah.
as we look ahead
Yeah.
is, how do we navigate this new reality?
Uh-huh.
How do we address the very real concerns of those who feel left behind without resorting to that divisive rhetoric and policies
Right.
that often accompany these populist movements?
Yeah, it seems like the key is finding a balance between the needs of the individual and the needs of the collective,
Right.
which has always been a challenge
Always has been.
for democracies. And it's something we're going to have to figure out if we want to build a more just and equitable society.
I think that's a good place to start,
Okay.
because ultimately the goal is to create a system that works for everyone,
Right.
not just a select few. And that's going to require us to rethink our assumptions about leadership, about power, about the role of government.
It sounds like we're not just talking about a change in policy, but a change in mindset.
It's a change in mindset, absolutely.
Yeah.
A shift in how we view ourselves as citizens, as members of a community, and as part of a global society.
It's a tall order.
It is a tall order. It's a much harder thing to achieve than just changing a law or electing a new leader.
Yeah.
Requires us to engage in deep self-reflection, have difficult conversations,
Yeah.
willing to challenge our own biases and preconceived notions.
It's a lifelong process,
It is.
but it's essential if we want to build a better future.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the challenges of the Trump era, but were there any positive takeaways, any lessons we can learn from his presidency, even if we disagreed with his policies?
That's interesting. I think one of the things Trump did well was challenge the status quo.
Okay.
He wasn't afraid to disrupt things, break with tradition, and speak his mind, even if it ruffled some feathers.
Right.
Now, while that often led to chaos and division,
Uh-huh.
it also forced us to re-examine some assumptions and have conversations that we might not have otherwise.
So maybe the lesson is that it's okay to shake things up,
Yeah.
to ask tough questions and demand better from our leaders.
I think so, but it's important to remember that disruption for the sake of disruption isn't necessarily good.
Right.
Needs to be accompanied by a clear vision,
Yeah.
a plan for what you want to build in its place.
Right.
Otherwise, it's just noise and chaos.
So it's not enough to tear things down. You need to have a blueprint for how you're going to build something better.
Exactly. And that's the challenge we face now.
Yeah.
The Trump era has left us with a lot of debris to clear away. But it's also created an opportunity for us to rethink and rebuild our political system,
Okay.
our institutions, and our society as a whole.
It's almost like we're standing at a crossroads
It is.
with multiple paths ahead of us.
Yeah,
And the choices we make now will determine the course of our future.
they will.
But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's bring it back to the listener.
Okay.
What do you think they've taken away from this deep dive into the Trump era?
I think they've gained a deeper understanding of the complexities of this period in American history and its lasting impact on the world.
Yeah.
You know, they've seen how one man's rise to power exposed those deep divisions in our society.
Yeah.
And how his actions on the world stage reverberated far beyond our borders.
And they've been challenged to think critically about the role of leadership
Right.
in a rapidly changing world, to consider the implications of populism and nationalism,
Yeah.
and to grapple with those big questions about how we build a more just and equitable society.
And perhaps most importantly, they've been reminded that they have a role to play
Yeah.
in shaping that future,
Uh-huh.
that their voices matter,
Yeah.
their choices matter, and their actions can make a difference.
So where do we go from here?
Right.
What's the next step in this journey of understanding and reflection?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the question, right?
Yeah.
Where do we go from here?
Right.
We've talked about, all the complexities of the Trump era, from his, unlikely rise to power, all the way to, the lasting impact both domestically and globally.
Right.
It's been a wild ride,
It has been.
to say the least.
Yeah, and I think you've hit the nail on the head there, that the next step is really up to each individual. We've provided the insights, the context, the nuances.
Yeah.
Now it's about what you, the listener, do with it.
It's not just about understanding the past.
No.
It's about shaping the future.
Exactly.
And we've talked about, the rise of populism, the power of social media, the deep divisions in our society. And these are all challenges
They are.
that are going to continue to shape the political landscape for years to come.
Yeah, and they're challenges that require active engagement,
Yeah.
not passive observation.
Right.
It's easy to get overwhelmed by all the information,
Right.
to retreat to our echo chambers, to feel like our individual voices don't matter.
Right.
But that's what allows these problems to fester and grow.
So what can we do? What does active engagement actually look like?
Well, it starts with being informed.
Okay.
Engage with different perspectives.
Uh-huh.
Even those that challenge your own views. Don't just rely on social media for your news.
Right.
Read books, listen to podcasts, have conversations with people who disagree with you.
Right.
Yeah.
It's about stepping outside of our comfort zones
It is.
and engaging in respectful dialogue,
Absolutely.
even when it's hard.
Yeah, if we can't even talk to each other,
Yeah.
how can we ever hope to solve these complex problems?
And holding our leaders accountable,
Oh, absolutely.
paying attention to their policies, their actions, their rhetoric.
Yes.
Don't be afraid to speak up,
Please.
to voice your concerns, to demand better.
Yes. Yes.
Remember, they work for us.
They do.
And let's not forget about the power of our own actions.
Right.
It's easy to feel powerless, right?
Yeah.
In the face of global challenges.
Yeah.
But we can make a difference
can.
in our own communities. Support organizations that align with your values. Volunteer your time. Have conversations
Yeah.
with your friends and family. I mean, small actions can have a ripple effect.
I think that's a powerful message to end on. The Trump era has been a defining chapter
It have.
in American history. It's filled with lessons, both cautionary and inspiring.
Yeah.
And as we turn the page and look ahead, it's really up to each of us to decide
Yeah.
what kind of story we want to write.
This deep dive has given you the tools, it's given you the insights to understand the complexities of this era. Now it's time to put that knowledge into action. Engage, reflect, and make your voice heard.
Make it heard.
The future is waiting to be written, and you have a role to play in shaping it.